Well, according to the clock on the wall, we have another hour before class starts. But I think we'll move that ahead soon. It's good to see everyone out this morning. Last week we read 14 through 26 in 2 Timothy chapter 2, and we finished verses 14 and 15. So, but in all fairness, we had to back up and discuss verses 8 through 13, which took up quite a bit of time last week. And we knew we were going to use up a lot of time when we got into verse 15 about the responsibility of studying to show ourselves approved, workmen needed not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And we had a lot of good discussion on that last week. But we won't rehash that, but we're going to continue on in dealing with those evil doers, those false teachers, and how to deal with that. We'll start in verse 16 in just a few moments. But before we do that, let's open up with a word of prayer. Dave, will you lead us in a word of prayer and we'll get started this morning?
Dear Father in heaven, as we approach your throne of grace this morning, we're so thankful to you for the many blessings that you bestow upon us each and every day. We will now in our Bible study, and we pray that you keep our hearts and our minds open to your word and glean from it the truth you'd have us to know. We can become better and stronger Christians in our faith. Forgive us, dear Father, when we sin and fall short. In Jesus' your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, I knew we were going to be down a few. I mean, just counting off in my head, I knew there was going to be at least 10 away, and then Janet's not feeling well this morning, so there was 11 people that were going to be gone this morning, and there still may be others that I was not aware of. But nonetheless, we have a good crowd this morning, and so let's continue on this day. We won't read it all the way through like we did last week, so we'll just pick up where we left off. Now again, verse 14 and 15, again, Paul was telling Timothy to remind them of these things, charging them before the Lord not to strive about words to no profit, which we're really going to focus on in just a few moments, to the ruin of the hearers. And then, of course, what I just quoted about rightly dividing the word. And then he goes on in verse 16 and says, but shun profane and idle babblings, for they will increase to more ungodliness. Well, it's important for us to know what that is, because how can you shun it if you're not aware of what is it? Right? I mean, and so when Paul's telling Timothy, I want you to shun profane and idle babbling. Okay, I'll do that, Paul. What is it? What's that? Well, yeah, that's true. Don't listen. But what is the profane that he's talking about here, and the idle babblings? What you might classify them as? I don't know if it's so much the speaking in tongues as it is what's actually being spoken. And what are those things that are being spoken that you want to shun? What's profane and idle? Cursings? EJ?
Is it what he's talking about, from what they're saying, take what they're saying and run with it?
No, what he's talking about here, when he talks about the idea of shun, you know, the idle words and the profane words, you know, so obviously we're talking about things that are wrong, okay? Obviously, what falls under that category, wrong words would be cussing, wrong words would be lies, wrong words would be, what was that?
Gossip.
Gossip is a good one. What else comes to mind of useless, idle words? Deceiving words. Just false words. You know, there's the false teaching that exists out there. Words that are going to stir up more problems rather than, you know, have you ever heard of or have you ever been in a situation where somebody's really not helping solve the problem? They're just making it worse. You're being destructive rather than constructive. And so these kind of things, as a teacher of the Word of God, you need to be aware of them, because he says they will increase to more ungodliness. And so I could actually put in these words of words that will encourage you to do sinful things, to believe sinful things, practice sinful things, have a sinful attitude towards other people. I mean, the sky's the limit as far as ungodly behavior that proceeds from the mouth. And guys, whenever you're talking about the dangers of the tongue, what chapter in the Bible comes to mind?
James?
James, chapter 3. 3, when he talks about you can't tame it, okay? It's unruly, and it's like, it's the course of it is on fire of hell. I mean, just so many dangers of the tongue. And that's not to say, Brian, that there's nothing in chapter 2 that relates to the tongue, because there's a lot in the Bible that relating to our speech. And again, if you're going to do this, what are you going to do this? How can you shun that?
No.
Can you control the tongue of other people?
No.
So how can you shun this?
Walk away.
Walk away. Okay? Nip it. Don't participate in it. Don't engage in it. Don't follow it. Okay? Don't believe it. I mean, there are things that are within our control, and we need to be mindful of that. I mean, the problem is there's so much garbage that can come in our heads, but we're allowing that garbage to come in. But we are in control of that. Are you not in control of your TV? You are in control of that. What does it have on there?
Off.
Yeah, it has off on there, right? I mean, we are in control of that. When you're with some other people, what are you in control of?
You.
Your feet. You can walk away. All right? You're in control of your speech of saying, stop, I don't want to hear that. Or that's wrong. Standing up for what is right. And okay, so let's continue on in the thought here, because he mentions, and their message will spread like cancer. Hymenaeus and Philetus are of this sort, who have strayed concerning the truth, saying the resurrection is past, and they overthrow the faith of some. Now we get an idea a little bit of some words that you are to shun. And what are some of the words you need to shun?
False teaching.
Concerning?
The resurrection.
The resurrection. There's a classic case. And it spreads like a cancer, man. That's really vivid, isn't it? What does that conjure up in your mind when you hear that?
Something growing.
Growing, right? And it's just spreading, and it's just out of control. Out of control. You get a cancer in your body, and it's just spreading. And yeah, that's what he's talking about here, and he's telling him that that's what will happen if you don't, because it will increase to more ungodliness, is what he's talking about. So we're talking about ungodly behavior. It's easy to describe what it is that Timothy is told to shun. And, we're around it all the time. And I just think sometimes, rather than shunning it, what do? We just kind of accept it, go with the flow. Paul tells us not to be conformed to this world. But it's easy to conform, isn't it? It's easy to conform rather than to shun. You just become a part of it. And when you become a part of it, your light goes out, or you're putting it under a bushel. You're just not being an influence for good. And this is what Paul's talking about. But it's not only what the results of you not shunning it just for self, but it allows it to affect others that are around you. Your influence of what you can do to nip it. And so he comes right out and mentions these two individuals. Well, is that nice to do? To talk about other people behind their back? Isn't that gossip? Let's talk about, is it right to talk about other people behind their back when they're not listening? Nancy.
He's not saying anything that I know would not have said to them, but he's saying that this is stuff that they're teaching falsely.
Okay.
He's not making fun of them.
Now, can we always say, will that get us out of talking about other people by saying, well, it's nothing I wouldn't say to their own face? Will that justify us saying anything behind anybody's back?
No.
No. So let's talk about this. Did I see a hand? Okay.
In this
Caitlin.
case, isn't it more of a warning? So he's not trying to spread gossip.
Right.
he's trying to warn the people, you need to stay away from these guys and not listen to what they've said because they've swayed from the truth.
Yeah. You know, here you have these individuals over here, and there's no question. Is Paul pointing the finger at them? Yeah, I mean, he's pointing the finger at those guys. Now, here's what often happens, what people think. People think when you point the finger at somebody else, what are they saying about you? What are some things that are wrong that they say about you when you're pointing the finger at somebody? You're a troublemaker, what else?
You shouldn't judge.
You shouldn't judge, and unloving. Right? Is Paul saying he doesn't care for these people? No. Is Paul saying he doesn't want them to go to heaven? Is Paul saying he doesn't want them to repent? You know, this is the problem we run into when people jump to conclusions. There's nothing wrong with identifying. Warren, you had your hand up a moment ago, and I just remembered that. It was a long time ago.
Well, I think the differential we're talking about here in this passage is that we got someone or a couple who are not speaking the truth.
Right.
That is huge. If he would just ignore it, Paul had just ignored that, he would be doing more harm than what he did with telling the truth and pointing out that when someone is saying something to you that's absolutely wrong, you have to question that.
That's right.
You have to question it. You can't necessarily change their mind, and I won't necessarily go talk behind their back, but I would say, if we're in part of the same group, I would make a point of it and say, hey, you know, we need to get this worked out.
That's right. That's right.
True.
And I think that's the seriousness of all this. I mean, keeping your mouth shut is not a solution. When somebody is saying something that's wrong, you have to make people aware of it. Jesus did it in his teaching, did he not? Beware of the leaven of the scribes and the Pharisees, and he would call them hypocrites. And he'd let up. Well, we were doing that on Wednesday night study, right? Don't pray like those people, those hypocrites who standing on the street. Well, Jesus, you shouldn't be talking about other people like that. Listen, you have to do that. Now, so what's the difference? And I think we just really need to nip this right now for our own sakes, for our own growth, so we don't cross the line of gossip. So you know some stuff about this person that you're telling these people, okay, or this person's hearing. You got a big ear here. All right. What's the difference of you saying to this person, it's not gossip, and saying something to this person that is gossip? What's the difference? We need to know the difference because have I ever talked about anybody behind their back? Yeah, lots of times. Lots of times. When does it become gossip? Pardon me? Well, you would hopefully that when Paul's telling them about these two individuals that they would warn some other people, so you hope that kind of spreads. That's not a bad thing.
Isn't it
That is true, EJ, because what happens with gossip, it does have a tendency to continue to spread, so that's wrong too. Denise?
Sometimes, doesn't gossip a lot of times things that are not proven to be fact?
Okay.
Is a part of the gossip, and the person that is gossiping, they also sometimes have an ulterior motive
Right.
in it, whereas in this case, Paul, he had a motive, but he didn't have that type of a motive. His motive was to change them so that they would come back to the Lord.
Okay.
And his motive wasn't personal to attack them.
Right. As you're talking, I'm just thinking of a lot of different things. You guys might be thinking of some other things, but there's no question that gossip can be, spreading lies, spreading things that are just not truthful. Your motives are all wrong. So often, the gossip is done for what reason? Why is gossip?
It's malicious intent, and a lot of times it's out of jealousy.
Jealousy.
To make you look better.
Puff ourselves up, right? Envy. When you're talking about it, you're being sarcastic and belittling. Hopefully to cause personal injury. And let's face it, I spread gossip about somebody that I don't like for what purpose? So that you won't like them. right? If that's the purpose, I just really don't want you liking somebody that I don't like. And so I want them to suffer for this because of that. And see, now we're starting to see the contrast between those that Paul spoke about and people that gossip. Was Paul saying things that were untruthful? Nope. Was his motives wrong? His motives were pure. There's a warning that was given. That's what Kayla was talking about. Caused them personal injury. They've already injured themselves. Okay, they've destroyed their credibility. Does anything else come to mind, guys, that we can put in this list? Because it makes for a good sermon. Misty.
Well, there's an implication that he probably went and talked to them first.
That they've already been told.
They've already been talked to,
Okay.
and probably not just by Paul, but by many others about it. So, because we
Right.
read in other places that when there's an offense, that you go to that person, and then you take witnesses, and then you take it to the church. So,
Yeah. I'm just going to just put it under the category of just being unkind and you're not really interested in helping them. Obviously, Paul doesn't want these individuals to continue on with their wrongdoing. You guys have heard it before. In some parts, like I've been down to Alabama, they have this saying, you can say anything about anybody as long as you end it with what?
Bless their heart.
Bless their heart. You say anything wrong, anything bad, just say bless their heart. Again, this is not a game. This is serious stuff here, and we as Christians are to be maturing and growing. There's nothing wrong with talking about somebody behind their back, especially when you're expressing concern and you're wanting advice and a plan of action and have their best interest in mind. A lot of times people will label something gossip when they really don't know that for sure, but it does exist, it is real, and we need to be mindful of it. Trey?
But I don't always know that it's for their best interest in heart that you're talking about them, because sometimes it's a warning that this is what this person is preaching, or this is what this person is saying. Mm-hmm. And you're not really doing any good for them, but you're warning someone else maybe not to listen to that.
That's true. That comes into play. I mean, not all of them are confronted. I mean, there's nothing. I'll get on and talk about religious leaders of our day. I've never sat down with them and talked to them face to face, but with their widespread influence, if you can warn people about it, like what Paul was doing, and I think indirectly, that if more people would listen, wouldn't that person eventually get to the point where they're saying, wow, a lot of people are not listening to what I have to say because everybody's been warned about me. So I either better change, or go somewhere else. But that's true. So I think indirectly you're helping this person. I think indirectly, the more widespread you let people know about this, and they won't listen to them, and hopefully that will wake them up too. This is something that's very serious, and so I just didn't want us to confuse the two. That it's nothing wrong with discussing and talking about things that other people are doing, but as we've studied on our Wednesday night talk, in our study on the Sermon on the Mount, how much of the teaching was Jesus giving? I'm just going to ask you, give me a percentage. How much of the teachings we've studied so far on the Sermon on the Mount, and we're already into the 6th chapter, center around the heart? The attitude. How much?
All of it.
Everything. It's so much of it is what your intent and your purpose is. What are your motives? When I'm accused of, or you're accused of being unloving because you're exposing something, that's on them, and they want you to feel so bad that you don't do it anymore. And that's not going to help, and that's why Paul says you shun it, and you be aware of it. Powerful stuff. And so he says he described them as saying they have strayed concerning the truth, which is a powerful lesson for all of us. What doctrine does that expose? What false doctrine does that expose? They strayed.
Calvinism, isn't it?
Yes.
They always say.
That's it, Taylor. Excellent. People say, once you become a Christian, you cannot so sin as to be eternally lost. You can't lose your salvation once you become a Christian. That is prevalent in so many religious groups. Timothy, a number of times in our studies, we talked about those who have strayed concerning the faith. And again, he's talking about these who have strayed concerning the truth. Now, if somebody says to you, well, they never really had it in the first place, response?
And how could they have strayed?
How can you stray? You know, how can you leave a place that you've never been?
And I think that's judging.
What
To
is?
say, well, they never had it in the first place.
Isn't that the truth?
Right, you don't know that.
And that, you know what? And I used that with the religious group that I left. And I was confronted with that philosophy when they say, well, you know, because I left, right? And I received the truth, but of course they think they had the truth. And they accused me of saying, well, you never really had it in the first place. And I remember telling them, don't you tell me I didn't accept what you taught. I did. You know, you're saying I never really received it in the first place. That's not true. I really did. But I turned my back on that because you called it the truth. Yeah, so that just doesn't fly. And you talk about judging. Don't point. They're the ones who are saying don't point the finger, and yet you're turning around and saying, well, you never were a Christian in the first place. Warren?
Well, I think it's important to remember during this time frame what's going on is that you've got the Pharisees and Sadducees and the Jewish involved in all this. And we know the difference between the Pharisees and Sadducees.
Right.
This issue that he's talking about is a hot button, resurrection.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
Therefore, if they're weak in the faith, there's an opportunity for I guess you'd say, fertile ground change.
Well, in this case, they're saying the resurrection what? What were they saying about the resurrection?
It already happened.
That the resurrection happened already. There are religious groups today, when they made predictions about Jesus coming back, we call their hand on it. You know what they've said? They have an answer for that. Now, does anybody know what they say about that? Because they had made predictions that Jesus would come back at a certain year. And when you bring it up with them, does anybody happen to know what their response is? Do you know what it is? They say, he did come, you just didn't see it. Nobody actually saw it. Well, what's the problem with that? Yeah, you talk about 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, you get over to John chapter 5, verses 28 and 29. You've got those that are resurrecting from the dead, those who have done good and those who have done evil. They all rise at the same time. And of course, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, Jesus comes back. We which are alive will rise and meet those that have died will rise first, and we which are alive will rise and meet them in the air. Any chance you guys are going to miss the second coming of Christ?
No.
Any chance?
No.
What if you died? Are you going to miss the second coming? You're just not going to miss it. It's plain and simple. And so they have these individuals who in their right mind is going to say, well, the resurrection's already happened. Who's going to believe that kind of stuff? Come on, you know the answer. Who's going to believe that? People that want to. People that are ignorant concerning the truth. And the third one, people who have been deceived and stopped believing the truth. You see, because we can stray. We can hold on to the truth. What you believe right now, are you going to believe it 10 years from now? Are you? If you don't, what caused that? Lack of growth. Bottom line, right there. Person, if you're not going to continue to hold on to these things and remind yourself of the truth and shun profane and vain idle babblings, you are going to lose your footing. You will, 10 years from now, you're somewhere else, you're attending somewhere else, and, it shouldn't surprise us, but then again, I say nothing surprises me. But would it surprise you if somebody who's been a member of the body of Christ leaves and goes to a denomination? Would that surprise you? It disappoints me. It saddens me. It does happen. And you say, how could something like that happen? I mean, with truth being taught week in and week out, how can somebody end up going somewhere else and are doing the very things that we have studied and pointed out that was wrong? Nancy?
It's what they wanted to hear. It's what they want to do.
Eve. Eve heard the truth. She quoted the truth to the serpent. All the serpent had to say was, you will not surely die. So why did she take it? She heard exactly what she wanted to hear. Remember, guys, Matthew chapter 7 and verse 7, when it talks about if you seek, you will find, does that work for truth and error? If you're looking for error, will you find it? If that's what you want? Absolutely. EJ?
What we were talking about, doesn't that go back when Jesus said, anybody else want to leave?
Yeah, I like that. That was John 6:66. You know, the majority leaves. An example of those that were listening to what was right, in that context, what actually was happening is they said, well, this is a hard saying. And so they eventually just turned their back on it. And so that's why you can have people become Christians. And as the teaching gets more meaty and stronger, it might become less palatable to the hearer. And so that's why I've told you guys many times that the gospel, when preached properly, will either draw people in or drive them away, and you don't apologize for either one. People will stray, and that's what happened. They strayed concerning, I like it, the truth. Now, do they think that they left the truth? No, and understand that. You know, when people leave, they're going to look you right in the eye and say, we found what was right. Well, of course they're going to say that. Of course they're going to say, Chuck didn't find the truth. I mean, when you're with a religious group and you go to another one, that you know, I found the truth, are they going to tell the members there, I mean, I'm a part of this denomination, okay, I was a part of this denomination over here, I leave and now I'm a part of the body of Christ. Do you think those members are saying, Chuck found the truth?
No.
Well, they're not going to say it. They're certainly not going to say that. So don't be surprised when they say things like, well, he never really obeyed it first of all. It shouldn't surprise us. They have to say stuff like that if they're not going to cling to the truth. So be prepared for that, because they're not going to leave and say nothing. People are not going to leave here. Members are not going to leave here, or visitors are not going to leave us and say, well, I didn't like the truth, so I just left. You know, you may find the odd one that might say that. But what they're more likely going to say is, I'm going where the truth is being taught.
They find their own truth.
Yeah. I expect them to say that. It'd be kind of ludicrous for them not to say that. You know, I would assume that. So anyways, sadly, in verse 18, they strayed concerning this truth, saying that the resurrection is already past, and they overthrow the faith of some. Now, there's some good news and bad news in there, right? What's the good news? Give me the good news. Not all of them, okay? Didn't overthrow the faith of all of them. Sad news, it did overthrow the faith of some. And so that's why you have to be mindful of that. I erased them. Those two guys that Paul was talking about there, because of their actions, it overthrew the faith of some. And so we got to be mindful of that. We got to be mindful. You can't ignore people having strange ideas, because it'll spread, like he talked about here, like a cancer. It'll go through a whole congregation. And does anybody ever know of churches that have split? I want to ask you a question. I guess it can be a yes and a no, but I'll get your response. Are all divisions bad? Are all divisions bad? Now you would say, well, of course, every division is bad. Well, that's true, because we all should always be united. But what's the alternative to that when we say, what's the positive side of a division?
It weeds out the bad.
What's that?
It weeds out the bad.
It weeds out the bad. when it comes to that, you know, you could sit back and, I mean, so what's the alternative if there isn't a division, Denise?
The bad infecting the good.
Yeah, what you've got chaos. You don't have unity within a congregation, right? And so when you stand up for what is right, you're going to have it, and which, by the way, happened with Diotrephes. You guys remember 3 John? In 3 John, Diotrephes wanted the preeminence. Now, do you guys remember that passage? Do you guys remember verse 9 and 10? Do you know what happened when some people stood up to Diotrephes? Do you remember what happened?
He can put them out.
He put them out of the church. Now, it didn't say everybody stood up to him. So, for a period of time, I don't know how long it was, but for a period of time, this guy was having the preeminence of the church. There were some members there that allowed it. Some other members were disgruntled. They didn't like what he was doing. So, was everything good at that time? Because they were all under the same roof, so to speak? No. And so the ones who withstood him, they put them up. Poor people over here, right? Well, these members stood for what was right. Just because he put them out of that physical group, so are they not members of the church anymore? If there was a split here, and 20, you know, let's just say somebody wheeled in a piano. 25 said, we're against this, and the rest said, well, we're for it. And so if those that are against it leave, what are they going to do? Well, shouldn't they just stay for the sake of unity? You leave, and what do? You start, assemble, right? That's what you do. Now, is there a danger when you go and start another congregation, let's say over on Sharon Road? Sharon Road. Let's say you go start, now there's River Ridge here, and we start a group over there. I want to ask you something. What prevents, or what's going to assure that it doesn't happen again?
Holding fast to the faith. And not letting that influence your thinking.
Could it happen again, is
Yes,
my point.
it could.
And then could it happen again?
Yes.
Yeah, I want you guys to understand, don't give up the fight. If you're always the one, you go down and they started another work, and all of a sudden there, you had some people starting to bring in false doctrine, you stand against it. We gotta leave again? Don't grow weary, right? When you're always standing for what is right, that's the main thing. Stand for what, that's what Paul was telling. And what happens when we get over to the 4th chapter? Remember? When we get over to the 4th chapter, Paul tells Timothy to preach the word. Why? Remember why? Yeah, there'll come a time when they will heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. So what's the 2 possibilities that's going to happen to Timothy? If he preaches the word and they don't want to hear it, what's the 2 possibilities? That's it. The audience is going to walk away from you, Timothy, and you got nobody to preach to, or they're going to yank you out of the pulpit because they want another teacher. So he's going to be dealing with him specifically. I'm doing it more generally, talking about the congregation, because he's talking about he's overthrown the faith of some. Look at verse 19. Nevertheless, the solid foundation of God stands, having this seal. The seal of the promise, of doing what is right. The Lord knows those who are his, and let everyone who names the name of Christ depart from iniquity. I love this, because Diotrephes, you can put us out, but I'm going to tell you something. The Lord knows those who are his. Don't ever grow weary, guys. I've told you this so many times. I'm a broken record. I would sooner meet with 5 faithful people than 50 that don't care. Or 50 faithful or 500 that don't care. Don't ever get caught up in the numbers. That's what EJ brought up a moment ago. Here's Jesus. He's standing by himself. Well, he's got the 12 with him. And there's the majority. It says many. And then it says many stopped following him. And he turns to the 12 and says, well, do you also want to go? Jesus, if they go, you're all alone. No. Don't bring it up. No. If you want to go, because the Lord knows those who are his. Nancy?
Well, then they said he was the one that had the truth. He spoke the truth.
Yeah, and they came back and said the right thing. Dave?
Where it says the Lord knows those who are his.
Uh-huh.
There's a saying a lot each year that the Lord knows your heart. How does that go along with this?
Oh, that's a good sermon. I've preached on that. That, you know, a lot of people will justify somebody's ungodly behavior by saying, but God knows his heart. Yeah, you're evil. You know, well, okay, so the guy, yeah, Chuck, I know this guy was drinking, you know, and he goes to the bars, but you know, he's got a good heart. What do they mean by that? He's a nice person. Or he does some nice things. You know, if you really have a good heart, you're not going to do those things that are wrong. Or if you do something that's wrong, what are you going to do? You're going to repent. You're going to repent. Simple. I'm not talking about perfection here. I'm talking about... But yeah, a lot of times people say he's got a good heart to justify what they're doing that is wrong. It never works that way, folks. It never works that way. And Dave's absolutely right on that one. So he talks about, since the Lord knows those who are his, and let everyone who names the name of Christ depart from iniquity. Well, duh, right? Isn't that like, well, of course, everybody who names the name of Christ is going to depart from iniquity, right? No. They should. That's why Jesus said, not everyone who says unto me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. You know, you want to call yourself a Christian? That's great. That's wonderful. But live up to the name. Those in Sardis in Revelation chapter 3 and verse 1, they didn't live up to their name. You have a name that's alive, but you're really dead. That's powerful stuff. And for you and I, our goal, I just want to depart from iniquity. I don't want any part of it. We need to be walking on the straight and narrow. This is what God expects from us. And because of that, you and I know that as a congregation, they can be made up of the good and the bad. And we need to be careful, because look what he says here. He describes the house in verse 20. But in the great house there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay, some for honor and some for dishonor. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from the latter, he will be a vessel of honor. Cleanses himself? Yeah, if you've got a household that has those of honor and dishonor, is there a danger? That's what he's talking about here, guys. We constantly got to be on guard about everything here as a congregation. Have you ever heard the concept? I've said this. I visited places and there's a rumbling going on. There's a silent rumbling going on within that congregation. What does that mean to you? There's some discord going on. There's trouble on the horizon. There's trouble coming. We can hear it because people are grumbling and complaining, and it's gaining momentum. How does it gain momentum? When you get people not nipping it, when you get people adding to the fuel, right, to the fire, and then it's gaining more and more steam, and before you know it, you've got a blow up. This is why problems need to be dealt with right away and not ignored. Remember the cancer that he talked about earlier. We need to be aware that there's some vessels of honor and some of dishonor. Can you know the difference? See, this is why we've been talking so much about how important it is to know what is right, because when you hear, when you visit with each other, and I hope you visit with each other, and we spend time with one another. Those are wonderful times, aren't they? They're great that we can sit around the table and visit with one another and do fun things with one another. But when you spend time with others, not only is that a potential for good, but isn't there a potential for bad? And what is the potential for bad there? And just because there's potential for bad doesn't mean you avoid it. But what's the potential for bad?
Idle babblings.
Idle babblings. When somebody has got discord, when they want to create strife and they've got some bad attitudes, those are the prime times to take advantage of it. Because if I want to sow discord, and I have Kayla and Dustin over, and I start sowing some of this, and they don't like it, and they leave, what do I do next? I invite another couple over, and I'll try to work on them. And if I have some success with them, then what am I going to do? I'm going to try somebody. You see how that works? See how it works? You soon learn those who not to associate with. And one of the sad things is, within local congregations, you'll have the weak that'll attach themselves to the weak. And the strong will attach themselves to the strong. The worldly, the ungodly, hang around with those that are worldly ungodly, because when the worldly Christian who wants to conform to this world hangs around people that are not wanting to do that, they kind of feel awkward. I'm more comfortable hanging around with brother and sister so-and-so that are loose like we are. Don't you find that happening? That's the danger that is there. And we need to make sure that I'm not going to control, you can't control me and I can't control you, but on an individual basis, you control yourselves to make sure you cling to what is good. You be that which is of honor and not dishonor, as he mentions here. Look at verse 21. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself of the latter, he will be a vessel of honor, sanctified and useful for the master, prepared for every good work. He's describing what we will become if we are faithful to God as a faithful member of the body of Christ. This warns us, wherever we attend, it warns us of what? Guys, let's get the big picture of our today's lesson. Wherever you attend, there is a warning. What is it? That there could be in that congregation vessels of dishonor. There could very well be members who are straying from the truth. How would you know if somebody's straying from the truth? Brian, how would you know? What's the one tool that you need to know if somebody is straying from the truth? The truth. You got to know what the truth is. You'll never know if somebody's drifting. If somebody's in your home and somebody says something that's a little bit off, you're not going to know it's a little bit off. You'll probably go, well, you're right about it. If you're not familiar with the truth. We have to be growing and feeding and studying. And then hopefully as that goes on, you're becoming more stronger and more vocal of standing up for what is right. Have you ever done it with friends? Have you ever had a friend over? Forget religion for a moment. Have you ever been with some friends and somebody says, yeah, I think Kentucky's going to win the tournament. Are you crazy? See, you're the type of person that has an opinion. You don't sit there and say to yourself, well, I don't think they will, but I guess they could. You're just, but I like the fact that people will stand up, even for an opinion, not to be opinionated, but the point is, there's nothing wrong with you expressing your opinion. You can do that. But doctrinally, do we have the ability, are we just as quick to talk with our closest friends when we're talking about a Bible subject and say, well, no, I don't quite agree with that. Is that our makeup? Warren.
Well, I think there may be an expression that applies to some of what you're talking about. It is an expression. It's about there's an elephant in the room and nobody acknowledges it.
Oh, yeah.
And therefore we just ignore it.
Exactly.
But we know that elephant's there.
Yes.
And it's going to have to be, something's got to happen here.
Yeah.
And I've seen that. Just simply, it only absorbs so much, but it's not going away.
That's exactly right. And I think as a congregation, we learned about our attitude. That's where you learn about little kids. Little kids, you're in the house, and a little kid will blurt something out that's just on their mind, right? He says something that everybody else is thinking about, right? But I like that. You're right, Warren, because people don't want to. And what Paul is trying to tell Timothy to encourage the other faithful members to do is to know what the truth is and to be willing to stand up for it to keep ourselves pure. Yes, I want to help other people get to heaven. We got another minute left. Let's keep going here. Again, verse 21, we need to be sanctified and useful for the master, prepared for every good work. There is so much that needs to be done. And look what he says to some extent that you have to do this. Verse 22 says, flee also useful lusts. What do you get from that? Come on, guys, what do you get? It's a warning to do what? At times, what will you need to do?
Run.
Seriously? Give me an example of somebody who ran. Old Testament. Fleeing useful lust.
Joseph,
What did he do?
he left the house, he left his cloak and everything, took off running out the door.
Potiphar's wife, was that the first time she tried to seduce him?
No.
No. She had been working on him. And then finally, when Potiphar's out of town, she grabbed him, right? And she grabbed his coat, and he left it, and he ran. That's the kind of thing. So what kind of things today could we do that comes under the category of actually fleeing? Turning things off, walking out of a movie. Anybody ever walk out of a movie? I've walked out of movies. I just paid $10 for a movie. I'm walking out of this movie? Just paid $10.
Don't go there in the first place.
Yeah, but sometimes you get yourself in a situation where you didn't know that was there, and you know what? You get up, you take a stand, and you walk out. Not getting yourself in those situations where you flee those useful lusts. Some of you guys talk about, you literally walk away from it, or you run away from it. Kurt?
You have a lot of advanced trailers as far as movies are concerned these days. You know before you ever get there.
That is true.
And the same thing applies with people and your friends. You know before you go there.
Oh man, I'm already passed. But that's right. I mean, we know. Is the button been pushed? Go ahead there, Brad. Yeah. I mean, there's no excuse today for not knowing. We need to prepare ourselves. Guys, we'll pick up right there. Oh, wait a minute. For class next Sunday, because I'm not going to be here to teach. So you guys are going to pick up in verse, start at verse 22. Let me put that up as a reminder. 2 Timothy 2:22. For next Sunday morning for the teacher.
Hey.
Make that a little bit larger, please.
Nope. That's next week's. That's not the reading. Can you read this?
Yes, sir.
All right. That's the reminder for the teacher.